My name is William Kilgore. I'm in the superintendent internship class at University of Texas at Tyler. And today I'm visiting with Mrs. Day, who is the CFO of Ingleside ISD. Mrs. Day, could you just kind of tell me a little bit about yourself and your experience as a CFO in the business office?
I am a CPA, and I did private practice, and then I went into public service as my second career, and I've been at the CFO level for about 12 years.
Awesome.
In several districts and an education service center.
So, going from a CPA to more in the school district, what was like the biggest challenge and differences?
My experience was really unique. I was the comptroller for a property management company, and I managed HUD housing and HUD audits. So all the compliance pieces I did in the private sector very much mirrored keeping up with TEA and all the compliance requirements that we have there. And I managed multiple units, which mirrors out just like campuses, because you're doing cost centers at campuses. Well, I did cost centers at community level for apartment communities and multifamily housing. So the two mirrored each other very much.
So there was a correlation between the two. Awesome.
Probably the biggest difference between the two is, of course, we had control of what we were charging for rent with a market cap. Only what the market will bear. And in the school districts, we're much more legislatively driven, and we're kind of told what our revenues are going to be.
So
much more controlled on the income side.
And so, like with school finance, it's constantly changing. I mean, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that as we go. But is that kind of one of the biggest differences? Is just how every couple legislative sessions things change with school financing, where when you were a CPA, maybe not as much?
It was a little bit more stable, but I dealt with tax credit housing and HUD rules and those things, and those could change with some frequency, but not a different playing field every 2 years.
Right. It didn't always just change.
It's like, okay, here's what you get this year.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So part of, as your role as a CFO, and one of the things that I'm kind of learning about as I go through this program is the budget. Of course, we know how school finance is driven by the legislature and what your property taxes and your basic allotment and all of that. So that's kind of what we're going to be discussing today. And really, I just would like to kind of ask questions about how you develop the budget for the district, what that process looks like, and who's involved in that, and then what are some of the things that you've learned over the years that are beneficial, that maybe, because I know you're new here at Ingleside, that maybe we haven't done before, that you're kind of bringing in, because I think you started just in January, correct?
Yes.
January. So you've been with us for a couple of months.
Just getting my toes wet.
As someone that I was here for 5 years in the early 2000s, coaching and teaching, and then I came back, and it's really a great place, and I hope your experience here is as good as mine has been.
I like the motto of join the family.
Yes, ma'am.
So.
Yes, that was the one. Yeah. This was the one school district that was going to get me out of doing what I had been doing for 20-something years to come back here. So it really is a good place. But thank you for being here.
We're unique in that we're kind of income driven. Like, you've got to know what your resource is to work with. And then you have all your needs.
Yes, ma'am.
And so your budget should tie to all of your campus needs assessments, and our spending should be driven towards the educational outcome of students.
Right, what those goals are.
And it's easy in the business office to go, I only have this.
What do we need to spend it on?
And not look at the more global, what are our needs for our students to be successful. So you've got kind of those two almost warring elements.
Absolutely. So has that kind of been, one of the big differences, as well as you've kind of been in this role as a CFO for a school district, is tying in those? I mean, when you're in the business world, you know what you need and what you have to allot certain money for. but it's that's more of a business decision, not a student
and not
decision.
a student decision, right? And when you're dealing with staff, it's very often, well, what can I spend this on? And the response is, what does your campus improvement say you're going to spend it on, or you need to spend it on? And so, we try not to, because I didn't study students. I didn't study educational outcomes. I just studied finance.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I try not to tell them what they need to spend it on, but then that they go back and look at their campus and what their needs are.
So your job kind of is to make them see the big picture of, you have this, but it has to be student driven. So find it under that umbrella, so to speak.
Right.
Okay. See, and as a teacher, you never think of things like that. It's just like, hey, I need money for this program or for this supply. And
oh yeah. So when they come back from a training, oh, this is the greatest thing. We have to have it. And it's widget B and we have widget A. Well, have we used A? Let's go back and look at A. Can we use A?
So would that be, I guess, one of the more difficult parts of your job? Would you say, like, as far as trying to direct campus administration and district administration into?
The hardest part is just having to say no, because we often have to say no because we do have limited resources.
Right. Even if it's a great program, we just don't have it.
Well, and that even goes into donations, because people want to give the school district resources, but they might want to give me, a pitching machine. But I'm assuming the liability of the pitching machine injuring a student. I'm assuming the liability of continuing to maintain the pitching machine. And so we have to look at that even on a donation level.
Is there like a specific formula, or is it just kind of do you use examples from other districts? How would something like that work as far as?
Just an internal assessment.
Okay.
Knowing that you're going to have to maintain it. How old is that equipment? What's the resources to maintain it?
So if it's brand new, you're more likely to be okay with it, considering if it was 20 years old and the maintenance. And
well, you have more levels in that you can't create inequity in your programs.
Okay. I got
So
you.
you
For
got
like
a little Title IX factors in there. So there's a whole lot of facets that you don't realize play into some of the financial decisions.
Wow, that's I already learned something new. We've only been talking for 5 minutes, but that's that is definitely something that I wouldn't think about.
Right. Someone wants to donate some fantastic program, but you have to hire 2 people to run the program.
Right.
That
now you have salary. On
you're
top of that,
right. You're
insurance
outside
costs.
of the scope of what the district is able to do,
Yes,
and there's always a want to do.
Right.
Just
It's
like with your
are
kids.
You willing to be able to do it?
Is that a want or a need?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. And having kids, I understand that completely. So, so I guess we'll just go ahead and dive into, the budget process. And I prepared some questions and I kind of shared them with you. And, we'll just kind of discuss if that's okay with you. So the first thing that I had asked was what methods you use to determine the anticipated revenue for the district. I know that the majority are tied to enrollment, attendance, and it's based on our taxes and all that other stuff. Can you just kind of tell me, more specifically, like to Ingleside, how that's determined in that process?
Right. Well, you have to start with a lot of basically estimates, because you have to not only project how you think your property values are going to come out for the district, but how your state property value is going to come out, because your funding is based on the state property value, the state property study, and you collect money on your local values. And so both those numbers go into the calculations of the template to know what your state revenues will be.
Okay, so and this is like, it's kind of foreign to me. So it's based on the state assessments.
Right. I think probably I wish I had already had the visuals, but I'll try to walk you through the visual. I saw a really good presentation where they took a jar, because since House Bill 3, we have a jar, and it fills up with the formula of 6160 a student, and you put your students in. We've got all these kids enrolled. Oh, but wait, I got to take 10 out because they don't come to school.
Mm-hmm.
So you get down to your ADA, the ones that actually showed up for school,
Mm-hmm.
and then the jar gets filled with the state, the property taxes at the local level, and then the state funding.
Right.
And so the jar is the same amount no matter what you do. And so it's based on the number of kids that show up,
Right.
and it's allocated between the state and local. And we're a recapture district, so ours is primarily local, has very little state aid in it, it's all local. And so you're trying to project, to do a budget, you're projecting how many kids are going to enroll, how many kids are going to show up on a regular basis, what our values are going to come out to be. We'll get final values in August, just right before, and so, or end of July rather, and then the state property value doesn't come in until January when you're halfway through the year.
So that really makes a lot of sense, doesn't
so
it?
That's what I'm saying. It's a lot of
it's
best,
a guessing game.
it's a lot of best guesses, basically, to get the most with your historical values and your historical information, and visiting with your tax assessor on how they're seeing values, how they look like they're moving.
So do you work real closely with the county tax assessor? Is that who you
It's
tend
actually
to
the
work
appraiser,
with? The
is
appraiser
who you're going to work with to get the values, and the tax assessor,
That's who collects
they collect the money. They send us the money as they get it. Yeah.
So do you meet with them regularly? How does that work?
They generally, I haven't dealt with the one in this county yet, but they generally have a general meeting. Here's our process, here's how it's looking for the year. And then we'll get preliminary in April, and then we'll get an updated May or June, and then you get the final in July.
So this is kind of an ongoing process that is really best guess.
And TEA will tell you what your funding is 6 months after your year's over.
Oh my goodness.
So it's all a reasonable estimate that just gets sharper throughout the year as you continue to look at it. But from the budget standpoint, you're giving your best estimate of those numbers.
Right. And so your philosophy, and if I'm speaking out of turn, or if I'm wrong, please correct me, conservative at best, because it's a guess, so you're always going to err on the side of not having as much as you might have, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you look at the historical data, do you go back, look at a 5-year trend or a 10-year trend, or how do you personally look at that?
I'm a data nerd, so the more data I can have, the better.
Right.
But you have to also know the history of the data, because we have had House Bill 3 came on, then we had Harvey disruption in all of our enrollment and attendance, and hold harmless. So if you just blindly download numbers, they incorporate a hold harmless and weren't the real numbers.
Yes, ma'am.
So you have to go look for the real numbers. And then we got COVID, and we had the same issue for 2 years. The numbers that you see in the systems aren't the real numbers. They're the hold harmless and adapted numbers. So the data in the last 5 years is messy.
So you almost got to go back to 2019, 2018, and then go forward.
Right.
Okay. And so in your experience, because I know you said have been doing this for 12, 13 years, something like that, as a second career.
15, yeah.
15, okay. So before the Hurricane Harvey and COVID and, all the inflation and House Bill 3, was there could you narrow it down to a general percentage that you saw yearly, on average? Prior
to House Bill 3, we didn't have, we used last year's numbers for these property values.
Okay.
And so you knew what last year's numbers were, and so we didn't have as many guesses. House Bill 3 brought on a lot more guesstimates.
So something that was supposed to clear things up for us only made it worse.
And it brought more funding, but it brought more funding with more requirements.
Like you have to spend so much on 55% on this.
Yeah. The career military readiness, bonus isn't known
for several years.
6 months after the year's over, but you have a spending requirement to spend it.
So you maybe spend the money you don't even going to get then.
Right. So,
Kind of like my paycheck with my wife. It seems like she kind of, you have this much, but.
So it is. I mean, House Bill 3 brought a lot more complexity to what we do in the business office.
Okay.
It did bring some, needed funding and some resources, but we have a lot more subject to allotment spending requirements.
Okay. So kind of talking about allotment, because I know that, we're a little different here in Ingleside because we're a Chapter 49 school, we're a recapture district. But how do we ensure that we're getting all of the allotment that we can get? Because I know that there's certain weights to things, like if a special education student or 504 or GT or dyslexia or whatever.
Right.
What kind of role do you play in that as CFO?
I mean, those weights, first weights, the IEPs, the speech, that's all driven by a student need, and we're required to provide the service.
Right.
And so you don't really have a control point there. You're just providing the necessary student services. CTE is an opportunity where you can look at your course offerings and look at the weights that they are. We might be offering nail tech, and it doesn't lead to a certification, so it has a really low weight.
Right.
And you have to consider, is this really beneficial for our students? Or do we want to offer a more robust course that say they get out of high school with a certification, with a tech, ability to go work, go take
kind of like our welding program, where they have license or certification.
Yes, where they have license, because they reweighted all the courses into. If it gets a certification, you get more weight.
Okay.
If it's a tiered program where you've got a 1, 2, and 3, you get more weight.
Weights towards it. Okay.
And but prior to House Bill 3, the funding worked that if I'm a CTE kid and this is my third course, I get some extra weight. But the courses were all kind of rewarded equally.
And now it's based on.
And prior to that, right. And so you've got programs that maybe have an old list of offerings.
Okay. And
so you can start to evaluate.
Okay.
And
that makes sense.
And get more funding from that source.
So what are some of the more, I don't want to use the wrong word, but, I know we have revenues that we get, your basic allotment, and then like we talked about your weighted. What are some other revenues that the district can kind of generate that maybe aren't as well known, so to speak?
Well, it's not well known investment revenue on your and to garner as much earnings as you can on the funds you have in the bank.
So that's your general fund, you have it in some type of investment then. And I know that you spoke at our board meeting last week, I believe it was. And you kind of gave the investment report that you give to the board, and that was kind of the first time that I've sat in board meetings before, but I've never been kind of there the whole time for that part. And that was really interesting to me because, I know that, of course, anybody wants to invest their money, they're going to get that percentage back. So can you kind of talk to me just real briefly about what we do here in Ingleside as far as our investment funds and what programs we're in?
Well, we're controlled by the Public Funds Investment Act and restricted in what we invest in to keep the taxpayer dollars secure. So safety and security is the number one goal of our investment program. So there are public pools that meet those criteria, and we are in public pools right now. There is an opportunity we're going to be looking at doing a fixed term investment that's a pool and also meets the criteria going forward, because we collect all of our tax money primarily from November to January and then spend it out throughout the year, and our recapture is due in August. And so going forward with next year, we'll invest that recapture money for that 6-month period before we hand it back.
And just pay it all at once instead of paying it
monthly. And that's an opportunity for us to, hang on to that money a little bit longer and earn the investments.
So, and I know we don't have specific numbers offhand, but what kind of revenue could that possibly generate for like us? Because I know we were like 8 point something million recapture.
Recapture, right. And so right now we're getting 4%. I don't have a crystal ball for how long we're going to stay up there.
Right.
The trends look like we're going to be getting that kind of yield for a while longer.
Okay. So is that something you can lock in at a certain rate?
Yes, at that in this term pool you could.
Okay.
Right now it's still climbing. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a relatively new concept.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask, is this something that
fixed.
you've ever done before at another district that you worked in? Did y'all do that?
Didn't have a recapture
Recapture,
district.
okay.
It's from talking to other business managers and CFOs of recapture districts and strategies.
The lucky
they're
ones,
using.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that, in our area, we have a lot of industry and, of course, property taxes have raised significantly over the last several years. So, we are fortunate that we are able to provide our local taxes for our budget, but there's other districts, and that's one of the things that confuses a lot of people is a district down the road, Gregory Portland. I think they're a recapture district now, but not by much. Or am I wrong? Not yet. I know
not yet.
I heard in about 3 or 4 years they're going to be hurting a little bit.
They're going to be a large recapture. They have taken advantage, as we have, of doing Chapter 313 agreements with industries that are coming in new to the area.
Right.
And you basically enter into an agreement with the industry that fixes their tax level for the school district.
Right.
We haven't agreed on it's going to be only valued at this, but then that impacts our state funding because the state funding formula is using the whole value.
Right.
And so the industry, you enter into basically a hold harmless agreement where the industry restores our state funding we lost.
Okay.
For that, and so that check is written to us outside of the state funding formula.
And that's not available for recapture, correct? The 313, like the funds that they that's not available back to the state. They get to hold on. Now, isn't it a certain amount? I may be wrong. Is it like $100 a student, or is there a certain amount?
I'm not familiar with. I didn't have 313s where I was at all, and I have not read the 900 pages that are in those documents yet. It's in my job description that will get studied.
No judging on my part, believe me. So, I've heard that it's a certain amount or whatever.
Yeah.
So what I've heard, and I may be completely off basis with this, is that if you're a smaller district, you don't have as many students enrolled, sometimes it may not be worth it as much. The cost benefit or whatever.
Right, because of that goes into the state aid calculation, and you may not have that big of an impact.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, cool.
Like I worked with a district that got the sparsity adjustment, and so it was a very small district.
What's the sparsity?
And they had 27 students, and they got funded on like 60 students no matter what. And so all the traditional things that you think would garner more funding didn't move the needle.
Didn't move it at all. Wow.
Because they had that other hold harmless sparsity adjustment.
Gotcha. Wow.
So there are as many scenarios out there as you can imagine.
Yeah, and it seems like, of course, it's always changing too. So it's as soon as you start to figure something out, they move the goalposts.
Lucy with the football.
Yeah, they just move the goalposts. Yes, ma'am. So we've talked about state revenue, our local property taxes. I know we're Chapter 49. Can you kind of just briefly talk to me about the M&O and the INS, and really more specifically to here in Ingleside where we're at.
Right.
Because I know that's kind of what drives.
Right. House Bill 3 brought on compression, state compression, and so our rate has been fully compressed as low as you can go because of the growth rate on there, and the INS is built to fund your debt service that the taxpayers have approved, so that rate moves,
like our bond for our middle school
and so like as that bond comes on with the debt service payments on it, the values go up, you can have a little lower rate.
Okay. So do we have currently in Ingleside, do we have any golden pennies or copper pennies? I'm not real sure
We
where we're
have
at.
some of our golden pennies.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
So but we still have a little room if we had to adjust.
We could get, but you have to go out to the voters for a Vader.
Yes,
Well, it used
ma'am.
to be a TRE. It's a voter approved tax rate election.
Right.
And I'm not sure how you sell it when it's all going back to the state.
Yes, ma'am.
And
Yeah.
that would be a challenge. I'm not saying that
Right.
we wouldn't look at it if it was best for our students,
Right.
but that it makes it a
Doesn't
challenge.
really make sense with the financial situation we're in being.
Right. And from what I can see, having started in January, that we've done a good job to fund as much as we can in bond, which is what you want to do in a property rich district,
Right.
because it's not your mom and pop
Mhm.
front doors paying
Right.
the majority of your
It's your
bond
industry.
expense. It's your industry. And so you want to be sure that anything that can be done in a bond, you do through a bond process.
Right. And I know they changed it a few years ago, I believe, where now even if you have a bond and it's not raising the tax rate, you still have to say this is a tax increase. Is that correct? Which
Yep.
really tends to turn off a lot of voters.
We have the education code, and then there's the tax code.
Right.
And so this stuff still exists in the education code that doesn't jive with the tax code. And so we've been compressed, the rate's lower. You literally publish a thing that says on the average house it's going down $50, but you have to put the banner that says this will raise, this is a tax increase. And I know that I've been hearing legislators talking about trying to
reverse
that, because it's really hard as a school district
to sell it
because you're saying it's not a tax, your tax rate isn't changing.
But yet they see this as a tax increase.
Exactly.
Sometimes the government just makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Well, so you've really kind of walked me through like the revenue and I'm so grateful because that's, in my experience in my career, I've dealt with a budget, being a director and a teacher and a campus administrator, but learning where it comes from is
a whole different.
Yes, it's completely different. So now I'd really like to kind of get into the budget process.
Okay.
So I know that we're kind of moving into February, and I know this is your busy time of the year, which I'm forever grateful for you taking this time with me today. Can you kind of just walk me through what the budget process looks like from your standpoint? I know that we use Omar's template, summary finances, and so forth.
That works all the revenue pieces, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So that kind of gives you that idea of, best guess is what we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. That's kind of our first goalpost there. The next steps involve looking at your staffing at the district level and with your campus administrators. You've got various, you can look at your enrollments year over year. The kids are going to be moving up. Have you got a big class that's jumping into middle school? Are you going to need more staffing to follow? Do you need less staffing here? So looking at it at a district and a campus. And then there's always grade levels and groups that have extra challenges.
Depending on like special education or GT
and so
special
do we need
programs.
to realign with as kids move up through the grades.
And how involved are you with all of that? Like, do you work directly with the campus administrators, or do you work more with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent and HR? How does that process play out?
We plan to meet all together this year and talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know, last year, I know that the campus administrators kind of met with superintendent's office and assistant superintendent. But I know with you being new, I didn't know if there was a new process you were bringing in, how you do things, and that's kind of what I was wondering.
One of the things that we haven't done, I think, as much historically here is following up after the budget piece, and we meet one-on-one on the staffing, because you get out at a campus level and things are hairy, and it's like, oh, move Miss Jones, she's going to do this. Well, everybody has special funding codes. And if I don't know you moved her and she's now has a full slate of CTE courses, then I don't have her appropriately funded.
Right.
And so we like to meet with master schedules once the year gets settled.
Okay.
Meet with the master schedule and your staff assignments and look at all that.
And that goes with like your title monies too, right?
Mhm.
Your Title I,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they can only do certain
And state
things.
compensatory education, and so
Okay,
yeah.
so that's going to be kind of new.
So that'll be part of what we'll do after we've done the budget, but the budget will be kind of the same thing. We'll look at your schedules, look at staffing ratios. We don't know what the legislature's gonna do, but where we're sitting with increasing recapture and fixed income, that we need to be sure that we are,
Toeing the line.
yeah, that we are doing the best to.
So do you look at, what do you use for like staffing measures? I know there's different studies out there, and like what's full-time and
Right.
How does your role as the CFO play in that? What resources do you use for
Well,
that?
you're obviously based with class size.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the primary driver, is the class size ratio. And when you get up in the higher grades, it's how robust is your master schedule.
Mhm.
Because you can build a master schedule that needs a ton of staffing, and you can build a lean master schedule. So how good are you at a master schedule? It's not, I haven't ever done the hands-on the master schedule, but am aware
Okay.
that can be.
Yeah, you can finagle things. And of course, as campus administrators, we
You know
always
how to
want
finagle.
more, we want more, we want more. And as a former athletic
if I
director.
keep that period open, then I'll know I can use them to cover this, or
Yes,
yeah.
Yeah, as a former athletic director, I
Yeah.
always needed more coaches so we can, so I do understand that
Yeah.
part. But it sounds like you're going to be very heavily involved in that. And
Yeah,
and
we
that's
want
pretty
to, we want to
typical.
get the campus level, start at the campus level meetings with staffing and.
So what's your
what's working and not
timeline when
working.
you kind of start looking at that for the upcoming school year?
We need to, because teacher contracts are right around the corner, and so we need to get rolling on staffing.
Right. So
So-
typically like February, March.
By March, we should
Have a pretty good
have our
idea.
staffing meetings done, yeah.
And do you use, I'm assuming you use like your campus improvement plans as part of that process? And,
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So as far as kind of moving out of campus now, looking at like your district administration, because I know that's kind of a whole other wormhole, so to speak.
Yes.
It does seem like here, just from other districts I've been around, we're pretty lean on the district administration. I know we have a lot of people that do multiple roles and have
and
combined jobs.
Pretty common of the size that we are too.
Yes, ma'am.
Because there's just,
There's only so much.
there's only so much administration you can bear, and
Yes, ma'am.
we're probably, we've got 2,000-ish students, in a district that has 3,500 has similar staffing probably.
Right. Yeah.
But think about how much bigger they are.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So we get our staffing done. What's the next step in the budget process? That's kind of, you got to look at, where your finances
Right.
might be. Best guess, you look at staffing because that's
Right.
the biggest
You
part
start
of
to
your
look,
budget.
yes, it is. It's, if you ignore recapture and just look at your real money you're spending, it's pushing 80% of your budget.
And is that
Yeah.
typical at most districts, about 80?
Yeah.
Is there's like a sweet spot that it kind of hits? Or, of course,
and
less
it's-
is better because you get more resources.
Right.
But
Well, and the staffing does not just your teachers, but your maintenance, your
Right.
custodian,
everybody.
everybody. And so it's pretty much
Is there-
typical of what it takes.
Is there kind of a number where you're like, no, that's too much of our budget?
I don't want to go any higher than 80, that's
no
for
higher
sure.
than 80?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So that's kind of
Stay-
like
stay around there.
Stay
Yeah.
around there.
Well, and if you just play with your percentages, and that's what we used to say, that we've got to cut the budget. Well, if 80% of it is staffing, you're trying to salvage with 20%.
Right.
And what's in that 20% is your property insurance, your utilities, your
things that you can't really cut.
your toilet paper, your
your paper,
there isn't a lot of meat there
right.
to cut, and so if you don't have staffing right, then you don't have control of your budget.
So really, it's, I mean, your budget is driven by your staffing. I mean, as far as that's where, if you have to make any significant adjustments, that's where you
have to look at. And one of the things that people lose sight of, but I need all these people. Okay, but if I have too many people, then I can't value all the people I have.
Right.
Because I don't have any money left to give a raise.
Everybody wants a raise.
Right. Well, in the funding formula, just circling back to that, is with House Bill 3, it's all based on enrollment. And so if I have the same enrollment for 3 years, I have the same revenue for 3 years.
Yeah.
But I've given raises. And so
where's that money coming from?
Right. And so that's why it's a hard,
yes.
We'll most likely do in our budget a 101 finance with the campus administrators.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Just
so they kind of get
it's
the
just
idea.
Not Miss McMean. Here's
yes, absolutely.
Here's where it comes from.
Right.
And here's why we need to look and do the best with our resources that we can.
And I guess, in your role in the financial side of not just a school district, but as a CPA, that's probably got to be one of the more difficult parts of your job, educating those because we don't typically know how those roll, where the funding comes from, how much we actually get as a district and so forth.
Right.
So it makes a lot of sense to kind of educate us, because then we can kind of, we're not always
appreciate
having to come.
Yes. You can appreciate the occasional no's.
Yes.
Or stop and think,
you
is this
understand
best
why
for
there's a
overall?
no. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, your job as administrator is to get all the resources you can for your students
Right.
and teachers. And my job is to try to keep it all equal.
Yes. Yes, you have to see the big picture of things. We just focus on our campus. So I know staffing, your salaries is going to be the big part of our budget. We said that's close to 80%.
Right.
There's other things though, like insurance costs, utilities. You're going to have maintenance expenses. Can you kind of talk about how you budget those things in?
Those are done, other than insurance, which is blowing up this year with windstorm for school districts in a major way. But the maintenance and all that is fairly predictable over what you've been
just
doing.
kind of a historical data.
The thing that will skew it is if you've got a lot of really old buildings. And you probably have a lot of repairs coming up.
Right.
Our facilities are relatively new or being done as we speak and in good condition.
Okay.
And so you're looking at a life cycle with HVAC and
and those are your big ticket. HVAC.
Those are your big HVAC is your big. You can't live without it in South Texas, and it's a biggie. And electricity, we typically do long-term contracts to help control that.
Like per kilowatt hour or whatever. So when you say long-term contracts, is it like a year? Or
no, we've been fixed for about 10 years.
Really?
And it'll come up in a couple of years to do it again.
And then do you kind of like bid out or just kind of see what the market has?
Yeah, we pretty much have to competitively procure anything at that level.
So insurance, and I know we're kind of different than like Central Texas or West Texas because we have windstorm.
Right.
What does that just kind of ballparking do to our insurance cost compared to someone who's not in a windstorm county?
We are currently in the current renewals right now. The Harvey bill has come home to roost.
Okay.
Major players have pulled out of the insurance market and other players haven't come in.
Right.
So it's a very limited resource pool, and I've been watching the insurance renewals of districts all around us, and larger districts have gone up millions. Wow. Everybody is looking towards 50% increase in their windstorm insurance. And I had one district tell their legislator that if you just picked their district up and parked it in the hill country, they would have $2 million more to provide for students because of that insurance differential.
And then that doesn't even take into account that we're recapture, so we're already sending money back.
Yeah.
And I know that at
Yeah,
the board
doesn't.
meeting it was mentioned it'd be great if they'd say, okay, well, at least we'll take off this amount from your
Right.
recapture to pay for your
Right.
windstorm, but it
And-
doesn't work that way.
Well, it doesn't work that way because the recapture is written in legislature.
Mhm.
And so they have to amend legislation
Right.
to be able to do that. And I know that all the coastal communities are discussing with their legislatures, there's got to be
Some relief.
there's got to be some equity.
Mhm.
Prior to House Bill 3, there was a cost of education index, which was kind of taking into account, comparing the cost
Right.
to operate a school in South
Here
Texas
compared
for
to-
here to here
Mhm.
to here. And so we had the 6160 then adjusted
Okay.
for the cost of
Okay. For like windstorm
education
and,
index for
right.
those differentials, because obviously, there are communities where teachers can't even afford to live, and so that community would have a higher cost of education, index.
That makes sense. It'd be nice if they would review that this
Yeah.
legislative session, because when you talk about
Yeah.
just moving, I mean, that's wild. $2 million more
Mhm.
for resources for
Right.
students.
Because their insurance isn't expensive like ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then now health insurance is another ballpark too. I
Right.
mean, I know that we're a little different than some other districts with health
Right.
insurance and
Yeah, we opted out of
Mhm.
TRS and we're enrolled with a group of school districts.
And was it more cost beneficial to our district to do that than being in TRS?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't take
Yeah.
the insurance. I'm on my wife's because she's in medical and they
And
have
they
way
have
better.
better.
They have better and it costs a lot less, even with what my
Right.
small insurance would be. But
I've had TRS insurance. I've managed self-funded health care, and now we're in that.
in the pool or
In
whatever, or the group.
Yeah.
So, have you seen more districts doing that over the last, since they've allowed that kind of to happen?
It's been a mix. I think
been a
there's
mix.
it'll be interesting to see how many, because anybody who stayed in
Mhm.
isn't locked in.
Right.
On an annual basis, they can notify by December that they want out,
They want to. Okay.
and they can get out that year. And but the legislature basically dumped money into
TRS.
the TRS care. Just gave it a transfusion so it could keep going.
Keep it alive.
And so that may be keeping some people in it
Yes, ma'am.
because of that. But
Just
yes.
like an incentive to stay in it.
Yeah, and the really hard part about healthcare is the cost to the employees.
Mhm.
And I think we have a better offering
Option.
for the employees
Yeah.
than TRS was.
I know I came from a district that was TRS when I came back here to Ingleside, and even though I don't really take it, people that I know have it, they seem to like what we're doing here
Mhm.
in regards.
Yeah, it's the
to
feedback
the
I've
TRS.
had so far. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So with the budget, I mean, we talked about, kind of looking at what our revenue would be and kind of looking at that historical data, and then staffing and your insurance costs and all those other expenditures that you're going to have. So
We missed one large part. State mandated.
oh yes,
Programs.
mandated, funded and unfunded programs.
Funded and
Because there seems to be a
unfunded.
lot of unfunded
Yes.
ones these days.
Yeah, and so we've got to meet our special education funding, and we have to meet maintenance of equity, which is year-over-year expenditures
Right.
for special education. So you've got to test those metrics. We have to meet state compensatory funding. And House Bill 3, they changed in the last legislature, they changed the weights, and they put our comp ed students in census blocks.
Oh, so it's okay.
And so compensatory education used to work all your free and reduced that you reported on the snapshot. At snapshot, you knew what your compensatory education funding was.
Right.
Now the compensatory ed students are placed in these geographic blocks,
Pools, yeah.
and then they assign a value to them. But right now what they're going through at the state level is they have to equalize. And so they're, they've got them all up there and they're shaking it up, and then they'll tell us what the
They'll
values
divvy it
are
out.
for all the pieces. And so in a month or two, we'll know what our comp ed number was from
Last year, right?
for
this
the
year,
current
right,
year,
right.
2/3 through the year, and hopefully our guess was reasonable. But they redefine those allotments, okay, and then career and technology. We look at our course offerings, and that one's been more complex because they changed the weighted.
Okay.
And the data is slowly catching up. But to estimate yours, you've got to place your courses in the weighted funding and your enrollment and spit out a funding, as opposed to, right, it used to be look at snapshot, who all's in their CTE course. All right, we got a number. We don't have that number right away. And CCMR, the college and career military readiness, you don't get until much later. So
yeah, it's like several years later, isn't it? Because I think it was the 2020 data we went over at the board meeting.
And so you've got all those things that have to come out right too. And the education code actually requires us to budget our state compensatory education funding first.
Wow. Even though you don't have a clue as to...
We don't know what it is. It's supplemental, which for me, it seems odd to budget a supplemental before you budgeted the basic.
Right. Wow.
But that's what education code requires of us in that.
So it's, as we've gotten into it, you look at how I would imagine a business would run, where you have your revenue and your expenditures, and you kind of know this is what it's going to be, give or take. You're always going to have things.
You're going to get blindsided by an insurance renewal or some of those things in the traditional business. But
then you get into like public education. It's just like, it's all best guess, and then we just hope for the best. And
so I used to tell my board, I did this best guess, and this best guess, and this best guess, and this best guess, and here's the number.
Wow.
But when you're at the budget process, almost none of those numbers are truly known at that moment.
It doesn't seem like a very efficient way to, but I guess that's why.
It's a government.
That's exactly right. That's the government for you.
That's where you realize that we're a governmental entity.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, I know that in the springtime, especially this time of year, staffing, you're kind of going through all of the revenue and kind of getting your best guess. As we move later into the spring, can you just kind of real briefly, because I know, you're very busy and we're kind of running short on time, but what does the rest of the year look like before? Because I know our budget, our fiscal year ends on August 31st. So September 1, the new budget takes effect, or has to be passed and so forth. So how does the spring and summer months look as far as what the budget process is?
Well, part of it is in the spring figuring out if we're meeting our allotments for our current year. And do we need to have spending requirements, or do we have miscoding that we need to identify to make sure that we meet all those expenditure requirements?
Yes, ma'am.
And to know where your fund balance, because obviously if I've taken a $2 million hit in my fund balance this year, I need some changes for the next year.
Right.
So seeing how we're coming out in this year sets the stage for the budget in the next year.
Okay. And I'm assuming this is kind of an ongoing thing throughout the spring and into the summer, all the way up until about August 28th.
When
the special board meetings and budget workshops and all kinds of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, because it is just a constant monitoring process, basically.
Yes, ma'am.
And then we'll be looking at what the revenue estimates are, considering raises with the board, and looking at the cost of different levels of raises.
Right. So let me ask you this, and I know just kind of wrap things up. I know there's also been a lot of unfunded mandates, and then there's also grants. We didn't really get into grants, but being on the safety and security side of things over the last year, I know I've worked with Dr. Porter with some things that TEA, as far as the window film and the perimeter fencing and all that other stuff. And that's a reimbursement type thing, so to speak.
It was a mandate first.
Right. But then they're like, then we'll
and then they're rolling out some reimbursement. Right.
So how do you, as a CFO, that's, because, that's not a small chunk of money that you're talking about. So how do you, figure that into things?
The issue is you're talking safety. And so you just find a way to do it. We just have to find a way to do it.
And if that means going into fund balance and then putting that money back in if you do get reimbursed eventually. what in your experience, is this just kind of a new world we're living in because of the safety issues with that time, or has it always
Yeah.
been like we're unfunded things and then they
Right.
kind of come out and said, we'll give
Not
you
as
something?
many unfunded things in the prior
Okay.
law.
More of the safety stuff,
Yeah.
just because.
Pre-K is the ultimate unfunded
Mhm.
because they fund pre-K only half
Half
day,
a day.
but we have to have it all day.
Right. Which makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Well, Mrs. Day, I am truly appreciative for your time today. You know what, you have really kind of opened as a campus administrator and as a former director of athletics, you know, I kind of saw bits and pieces of things.
Yeah.
And I knew how much I had in my budget and how I could spend it on certain things. But as far as how it all comes together, you know, I've really, I've learned a lot just kind of talking with you and visiting with you. And I'm really excited that I get to learn more from you as we go throughout the next few years.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. And that's something that I know that this is my weak area because it's not something I've ever really done. But I hope that I can continue to learn from you, and I really just want to thank you for your time, and I appreciate our talk.
And I have to say that we will run right up to the end because we've got to see what the legislature does.
Yeah, and then there's special sessions and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So,
but we're already in a budget by the time they do a special session.
Oh yeah, yes, ma'am. Heck, they might do special sessions halfway through next year too. So, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So, and we're